Cop used a zip tie to choke a black boy for running. Didn't know his dad was the Pentagon's chief legal advisor. The summer air hung heavy and thick in the city streets as Malik Johnson darted around the corner, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The afternoon sun glinted off the pavement, and the distant hum of traffic was punctuated by shouts and sirens. Malik's sneakers slapped hard against the cracked concrete, the sharp rhythm echoing his desperate need to escape. Behind him, the voice of a police officer barked sharply, "Hey, stop running!" Malik didn't look back. He couldn't. His lungs burned and panic clawed at his mind. "Please, no," he thought. "Not again." Running had never been a crime, yet every time Malik took a step too fast, the city seemed to close in tighter around him. The last thing he wanted was trouble, but trouble always found him. Ahead, a narrow alley yawned like a trap. Malik veered in, his eyes darting to the shadows. The officer was gaining on him, heavy boots pounding the pavement. Malik's chest tightened as the world seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. Then, in a sudden movement, rough hands grabbed his shoulders and slammed him against the brick wall. "Stop right there!" the cop hissed, voice low and harsh. Malik's breath hitched as a plastic zip tie snapped tight around his neck. The sharp pressure cut off his air, his vision dimming at the edges. His hands flailed helplessly, his protests muffled. "I wasn't doing anything," he gasped, panic flooding every fiber of his being. The officer, cold-eyed and unsmiling, leaned closer. "Running in this neighborhood is suspicious. You better learn to stay put, boy." Malik's world spun. The zip tie tightened again as his struggles grew weaker. Fear, humiliation, and rage tangled inside him, a storm waiting to break. Then, suddenly, a deep voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Let him go." Both men froze. Malik's eyes widened as a tall man in a sharply tailored suit appeared at the alley's entrance. His posture was calm but commanding, his dark eyes sharp and steady. The officer loosened his grip reluctantly, stepping back with a smirk. "What's this? Daddy's here to bail you out?" The man's expression hardened. "I am Malik's father. I'm David Johnson, chief legal advisor to the Pentagon." The cop's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but then he laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, that don't mean much here." David Johnson's gaze didn't waver. "I suggest you reconsider your actions. That zip tie is evidence of excessive force and racial profiling. I will be reporting this incident, and if you think I won't take it all the way, you don't know who you're dealing with." Malik coughed, rubbing his neck, still shaking. He looked at his father with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Dad, I'm sorry." David's jaw tightened. "No apologies. This stops now." In the sterile, fluorescent-lit conference room of the Pentagon 3 days later, David Johnson sat at the head of a long mahogany table. Around him were faces he knew well, military brass, government officials, and legal advisors. But today's meeting wasn't about budgets or operations. It was about justice, accountability, and a system teetering on the edge of corruption. David's phone buzzed discreetly on the table. He glanced down. A message from Malik. "They're trying to bury it. The city's protecting that cop." David's lips pressed into a thin line. Of course they were. The system always did. The very institutions meant to protect the public were tangled in old loyalties, hidden agendas, and quiet cover-ups. But David wasn't about to let that stand. "I want a full investigation into Officer Michaels," David said, his voice cold and steady. "This isn't just about one incident. We're looking at a pattern, racial profiling, abuse of power, and cover-ups within the department. If the Pentagon can't stand for justice, what hope does anyone have?" A senior officer shifted uncomfortably. "David, this could escalate beyond the department. Political fallout." David cut him off sharply. "Justice isn't about politics. It's about right and wrong." The room fell silent, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Days later, Malik sat with his father in their modest home. News channels ran stories about police misconduct, but nowhere was Officer Michaels' name mentioned. Malik's jaw was set tight, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I want them to see the truth," Malik said quietly. "Not just for me, but for everyone who's been choked down by this system." David nodded, eyes steely. "We'll do more than just expose it. We'll change it. Late that night, David tapped away at his laptop, pulling strings few knew existed. Confidential reports, internal memos, and hidden body cam footage, all pieces of a larger puzzle he was determined to reveal. As the clock ticked toward midnight, a carefully encrypted email was sent to investigative journalists, whistleblowers, and human rights organizations. The following morning, the city woke to headlines screaming of corruption and racial injustice. The leaked footage showed Officer Michaels choking Malik with the zip tie, his smirk, the casual brutality, the moments before Malik nearly lost consciousness. Public outcry erupted, protests swelling in the streets, demanding accountability. At a hastily called press conference, David stood before flashing cameras and a sea of reporters. Malik was beside him, no longer trembling but standing tall. "This is not just about my son," David said, voice ringing with conviction. "It's about every young man and woman who has been targeted and silenced. We demand justice, transparency, and systemic reform. No one is above the law." Behind the scenes, the wheels of justice began turning. Officer Michaels was placed on administrative leave pending a federal investigation. The city's police chief resigned amid mounting pressure. David worked tirelessly to draft new policies mandating better oversight, anti-racism training, and civilian review boards. Weeks later, Malik walked into a packed courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Officer Michaels sat across the room, his usual arrogance replaced by a cautious, defensive posture. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, body cam footage, eyewitness testimony, and internal documents exposed by David's efforts. The defense tried to spin stories, but the truth was too clear, too undeniable. When the jury returned, the verdict was unanimous: guilty. Malik's shoulders relaxed as the judge pronounced a sentence that sent a strong message: zero tolerance for abuse of power, especially when fueled by racial bias. Outside the courthouse, Malik looked at his father, eyes shining with gratitude and newfound hope. "Thank you, Dad. You saved me." David smiled softly, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. "We saved each other." As the crowd cheered, Malik's thoughts drifted to the future, a world where justice wasn't just a word, but a promise kept. The scars of the past remained, but now they were the fuel for change. The city, once choked by fear and silence, was beginning to breathe freely again. Disclaimer: this story is a fictional dramatization created for entertainment purposes only.